Hello and welcome to AgriFocus Extra, the podcast from Agriland that looks in depth at some of the topical issues of the day. I'm Stella Meehan and I'm joined today by Beef Sector Manager with Borbia, Mark Zieg, to discuss the beef market and in particular beef price. This week alone, factory quotes are already 5 to 10 cent a kilo more than last week, and beef price is hitting nearly €7 per kg. Now, just to put that in context, beef price back in 2019 was averaging at around €3.70 per kg. So, Mark Zieg, thanks for joining us. What do you think is driving price in the beef sector at the moment, Mark?
Yes, Stella, indeed, it's they're fantastic prices, and we couldn't have predicted this, as you say, a few years ago. So, it's good to see that upward movement, which obviously for farmers is much needed. But look, it's I think really as always, it's supply and demand related. Probably stronger on the supply side because our own supplies are down. They were actually fairly steady last year, but the prediction for this year is that we'll be 70 to 90,000 head of cattle down for this year, and predominantly in the first half of the year. So we're living through that at the minute. Also on our export markets, biggest market obviously a next door market is the UK. We saw strong demand there again, despite the fact that their own numbers were slightly up last year, and the same in Europe as well. But everybody's living with the same thing that we are, that the knock-on effect of that is because the higher numbers were not just that the cattle were there, they were being brought forward. So strong demand was meaning that cattle were coming into the kill earlier. So the cattle won't be there this year. So I think certainly for the first half of the year especially, but also in the second half of the year, that means there's tight supply. And, consumption, I won't say, we're not out of the woods, but taking into account that very strong price and the some of that price increase has been handed on to consumers at the shelf. The consumers are to date, they're sticking with beef, they're paying more and consuming fairly strong as well.
The month of January has a campaign going. It's still going, but I think it was probably more popular in previous years, this Veganuary, where they would try to encourage people to reduce their red meat intake and maybe go for more plant-based. But judging by the supply, demand and the current price of beef, it doesn't seem to have had any impact this year in terms of, as you said, consumption.
No, I think all around, no matter how we look at it, for now anyway, that threat has subsided. We don't see it as much in advertising and marketing or reported in the news. Obviously, vegan diets and vegetarian diets, etc., alternative diets are very much part of the landscape now, and those consumers are there and doing that. But it's not hurting, as you say, it's not hurting beef consumption. We actually do a shopper monitor in Borbia where we quarterly look at what consumers are doing or saying they're doing, and we have seen in that consumers are finding it tough to pay the higher prices, especially in continental markets. They're not reducing more than they were, so that impact is lessening. But we are seeing that there is a drift in that from that competition from the meat alternatives and vegan products. It's not as common, or as there's not as much focus on it as there was. And the other thing that does seem to be coming into play is that people are rediscovering and seeing that there is to a degree value in the extra cost. Obviously, they're paying it, so there is a value. But it's not just taste or that people enjoy eating beef, with that we know they do, and they tell us that. but also that it has a contribution to good nutrition, and the natural protein trend, and re-engaging with the fact that there's a lot more than protein. It's rich in a lot of vitamins and essential vitamins that are predominantly found in beef, and also iron as well. So this is resonating especially with the younger consumer, and bringing them into the demand for beef as well.
And going back to a point that you made originally there as to why we're seeing these high beef prices at the moment, it really does come down to supply. So let me feed that into, I suppose, an outlook or a forecast or your crystal ball. Mark, if the supply is tight and likely to be particularly tight in the first half of the year and still tight towards the back end of the year, is the beef price that's currently being paid to farmers at the moment, do you think that's more of a medium term or even potentially a long term situation for them now, or some farmers are still convinced or maybe fearful that this is a short term blip?
Yeah, look, I think the dynamics are all in place. I won't predict the price for the autumn. That's a dangerous game, and I've avoided it up until now. But I think the dynamics are all in place, because there is no alternative supply within Europe. As I say, UK supplies are forecast to be down by 5%, which is quite strong. I think 1.5% across the EU, and we're seeing that translating already into a lot more demand, and customers, concerned or making sure that they're planning out where they get their supply from. So, I think with that, the dynamics are there for, maintaining good prices, because, as I say, we don't have more cattle, they don't have more cattle. Consumers, it does rest a little on consumer confidence, and will consumers keep spending more? If we look at the retail Kantar figures in the UK last year, prices went up by, or spend, sorry, should I say, went up by almost 5%. But despite higher prices, actually in terms of volume, consumers consumed 0.5% more as well. So that we haven't seen that in a long time. Obviously, the risks with that is, do we go out of step with the alternatives? There are obviously other proteins that are always at a lower price level, or have traditionally been, like pig meat and poultry. We did see that in Europe last year, that retailers and our customers see that it's hard to attract consumers with these very high prices in beef. They might put more promotional focus on those other proteins where prices are more achievable. And we have seen that promotions and price promotions, especially around the Christmas period, have been hugely influential in attracting consumers and driving consumers into store, and a lot of our customers across markets have used that. So that is a little bit of a watch out. Everybody's got a budget as a consumer in terms of how much they can spend, and that's a limiting factor. The other thing as well is that we're not in any of these markets I've talked about on our own. There are other imports, and they will be watching. The EU are predicting maybe to see more imports from outside of the EU this year, as our own European production goes back, and consumption is to be solid. Same in the UK, with that additional import demand and free trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand. There's a lot of talk about that. For the minute, I would say the international exporters, they have strong demand in the likes of the US and the likes of China and other Asian markets that they very much prioritize. However, there's no getting away from the tensions in international trade from the big countries like China and obviously the US quite spectacularly, and what impacts that might have, and if there are large scale suspensions or bans or tariffs or whatever, that could drive a lot of those bigger international exporters like Australia, like Brazil, to focus on Europe more. And when Europe is, it's always been a very high priced market in international comparison. And then if they're, the conditions are difficult in the markets that they're predominantly going to, that's one we have to keep watching.
Yeah, you're talking there about the EU market, I suppose, and tariffs and the trade environment across the world at the moment is extremely volatile, predominantly led by the President of the United States at the moment, driven, I would say, by the President Trump. But what about Mercosur, that trade deal? I mean, that's a trade deal, that hasn't come out since the new administration in the US. This is something that has been worked on for years, and there's concern. Some people will argue that there's misinformation about it or disinformation. Others will say, no, there's actually bona fides concerns here among the beef sector. What is the likely impact on beef exports from Ireland if the Mercosur trade deal is implemented, if any?
Yeah, look, at its worst, it could, of course, have considerable impacts because there would be a volume of potentially steaks involved that is equivalent to the total volume of steaks that Ireland produces. And of course, we export 90% of what we produce. So if that all landed at once, that could distort the market. It could undermine our market, and all of those positive developments of price increases. Because even though countries like Brazil have seen rapid increases in their prices over the last number of years, they're still significantly below European prices and our prices. But I think we don't want to be too alarmist on it, because there are structures in place that the additional tonnage that is there, it can't be just accessed in one lump. It has to be allocated, and so there is forewarning, and there are safeguard clauses as well that the EU has highlighted, and we have to take them at their word that they will protect the domestic producers and utilize those safeguards to make sure that it's in an orderly fashion. And these countries have access to the European market all the while. And yes, at some points we have seen larger volumes come in and undermine prices in the EU. But yeah, I think there's a lot of detail still in terms of the implementation to be worked out. And I think that's what we all really have to watch, that beef is a sensitive product, and the farmers of Europe have made their their concerns very, very vocal, and that is, everybody works to make sure that it delivers what the EU's commitments are, and the market does need imports. We have to accept that. And we export to other countries that we make the point to, that they need imports, and they need our imports outside of Europe. So we have to play the game, but make sure that the real rules are kept.
And what about the market in Korea and China? Has the suspension of beef imports there from Ireland because of atypical BSE, has it impacted our trade there at all, or was it sort of a small trade to start with anyway?
Yeah, the trade over the last, obviously we've had a few whatever stops in that market over the last number of years with the previous BSA situation and now the atypical again. Now last year when we were still in the market, it was developing reasonably well, not to the same extent as it was say 4 years ago, where a large number of cuts from across the carcass were going there. It was quite specific to a handful of cuts that are in demand in that market, and that we could be competitive in, because last year already prices were quite high in Europe, and it was for most exporters more feasible to keep that product in Europe and take the price that was going there. Having said that, a lot of exporters did keep a toehold in the market, and beef imports in China are still going up. So that's not the case with all the meats. There's more consumption, there's more interest in it. So it's not a market that we'd like to give up on. We're certainly committed to it from Board BIA, because the Chinese market is changing a lot as well. There's a lot more interest in more premium products that wouldn't have been the focus for our exports before. And that's what we need long term is to be able to take those premiums for different cuts out of the markets where they're available. So Korea, is whatever, quite disappointing just at the minute, because it's a great market. It opened up with great enthusiasm for the Irish product when we launched the product there at the end of last summer. A lot of interest in the qualities and the standards that we have here, and they went and put in good strong orders straight away. So the suspension that originally came with the atypical BSE was short-lived, and that market is open to us. But obviously their own domestic concerns now, it's been quite tumultuous, and that has impacted on domestic demand. And everywhere in Asia at this time of year with Chinese New Year and everything is a key consumption period, and that has not materialized in Korea. But look, we think that'll we hope that'll work itself out, and that strong underlying demand, that interest in Irish beef, and again for the things like the grass-fed nature of it, the quality assurance and sustainability guarantees that we can give. They're things that are important in a sophisticated market like Korea, and we believe long term that's going to come back, or even in the medium term, should I say.
And Mark, farmer representatives often criticise the fact that UK beef price consistently exceeds Irish beef price. But where are we now sitting in terms of, I suppose, maybe the EU benchmark, the export benchmark?
We're traditionally, as long as I've been with Board BIA and based in the UK market, that has been, we don't receive the same price as the UK market, but we would generally be somewhere between the EU average and the UK price, and that's as it is at the moment. We often are a little slower to react price-wise to when the price is rising quite fast, which would have been the case last autumn, because buyers will buy nationally, be that in European countries, be that in the UK, drive up demand. But normally as the price then flattens off, we're often retained at a higher price. So at the minute we're a few cents higher than the EU should say actually 20 cent above the EU average. But yeah, look, the UK, I think it's been covered before quite well, but they are selling all of their prime beef into the domestic market, into that high priced environment that is there. The self-sufficiency is only around 65%. If they could, they would probably buy all British beef. We are the next preference. We're accounting for over 70% of the imports. We're the only ones currently with access to the retail and to the higher end customers in food service that are requiring quality assurance and sustainability guarantees. So we're well placed there. But when you're selling half of your product outside of the UK into markets that are generally lower priced, of course you're not going to be able to make up the same carcass value as for an animal that is killed in the UK at the UK price and sold into the market at the UK price.
Finally, Mark, then I suppose, what about the PGI for Irish grass-fed beef? Where's that? What's it going to do for us if certainly the short-term projection for beef price in this country is good at the moment, and obviously we're down on supplies? Will the PGI do anything for us or offset anything, even down the line when it comes to the likes of extra imports as a result of Mercosur?
Yeah, the PGI is a strong part of our marketing of Irish beef as a premium product, and we're just talking about it there to try and keep it at the premium end and get closer to the highest prices that the market can give. That's been working quite well, especially in the Italian market. Where Irish PGI, grass-fed PGI beef is on sale, has been supporting the customers that have it very well. We saw last year in Italy that beef sales and meat sales were under pressure, and they actually flattened off. But the retailers that were using the PGI and promoting with us, they actually managed to post very strong growth figures. So PGI is really important. It's really recognized in Italy especially, but also in other, especially Southern European, and I'll count France into that as well.
Well, that's all we have time for on this special episode of AgriFocus Extra, all to do with the beef trade and beef market. Thank you once again to our guest today, Beef Sector Manager with Borbia, Mark Zieg, for joining us. We hope you found this podcast informative and interesting. Please rate and review the podcast and do share it with anyone you think might like to listen. Until next time, goodbye and take care.